Hello and welcome to the Homeless Consultants channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. And in this video I'm going to do a part 2 or an update on my most recent video, which concerned the manner in which the state of Minnesota helped to contribute to the second rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan with all of its consequences. I'm not going to harp a lot on the fact that Minnesota did that, other than to repeat to you that Minnesota elected Joe Biden, presuming that we would have an honest election. They actually elected Joe Biden to replace Donald Trump. They wanted Joe Biden to replace Donald Trump. Now, of course, what happened in so many other states makes it clear that that election was utter nonsense. But regardless of that, Minnesotans intended for Joe Biden to become the leader of the free world. Now, it may have come about by him becoming the first president of the new American Banana Republic. That's irrelevant. Minnesotans wanted Joe Biden in that kind of power, with this little Harris girl who has no experience of any kind to be on a school board, let alone to be vice president, or perhaps soon president of the American Banana Republic. That's all I'll say on that. What I want to talk about today is, now that we have a few weeks under our belt of this new Taliban rule, and since today is August 31st, and the United States has officially announced that the last American soldier has left Afghan soil, let's see what the Taliban's been up to, shall we? Since this is what Minnesotans wanted, let's find out. First thing I should point out is that our on-the-ground intelligence gathering in Afghanistan to know what's going on with the Taliban and with ISIS and with all these other terrorist groups, not to mention, don't forget, Afghanistan borders Iran, Pakistan, China, borders a lot of places. All that intelligence is now gone, so we're not going to know what's going on in those regions anywhere near as well as we did previously. It's gone, out the window. Of course, if you're not a very good leader, you don't really need intelligence. You don't have intelligence, so perhaps the president of the American Banana Republic hasn't really noticed this absence of intelligence. Biden has been claiming victory throughout. He refuses to admit that anything is even wrong. He claims it's a victory because I said I'm going to do this and I did it. Yeah. You know, there's a difference between keeping your word and having the flexibility to adjust based on events. No one should ever really say, well, we're going to be out of there by such and such date, unless you know that there's no contingencies that will interfere with that. In that case, you would say, we will be out by such and such date unless this happens. There's no victory here, folks. This man refuses to admit what he has done. He refuses to admit the blood that's on his hands. And I guess, you know, how can I not mention it? Again, I'm not going to harp on this, but the suicide bombings that killed 13 American soldiers, injured countless Afghans and Americans. After 18 months of no American soldiers being killed in Afghanistan, the body count skyrocketed, and the thought that those soldiers returned home in coffins to be met by the first president of the American Banana Republic, just to honor them. I'm going to try not to think about that. I don't want to vomit today. This is objectively speaking, you know, from above. If you view it from above, you try to view it from a context of how people will view this hundreds of years in the future. This is one of those world-changing, devastating events. The fall of Babylon, when in one day Babylon was taken over by the Medo-Persian Empire. When in one day the Egyptian army just disappeared. Coinciding with the Exodus. All of a sudden, Egypt, the world power, just disappears from the world stage for a couple hundred years because their army disappears under the Red Sea. The whole dynamics of power in the world change. This is one of those events, and it didn't have to happen. And it is to the detriment of the United States of America more than most countries, not all. The toilet papers here in Minnesota, Star Tribune, Pioneer Press and all that, they're just spinning, just pulling out the rhetoric machine, just bleh. Every tool and tactic of manipulative language they can muster up, they're using to try to spin this as some kind of a success story. I don't want to vomit today. I'm not going to think about it. Not right now. And still, for all this, after all this time, as I mentioned in my first video, not, to my knowledge, that I can tell, not one of my coworkers has shown like the slightest hint of maybe beginning to think about the idea of one day, you know, that they might consider in the future the possibility of giving just a little bit of a damn about any of this at all. I'm just not seeing that in my coworkers who are representative of what Minnesotans are. Let's talk about the Taliban a bit here. So far, the Taliban have, as always, gone door to door, hunting people down to kill them in front of their families. Why would they do that? Well, they don't need a whole lot of reasons. You see, this is a primitive, barbaric, savage 7th century mindset of monumentally stupid people who are gathered together in a cult. They don't really need a reason. All they have to do is not like you for any reason. Much like the loony liberals in America. In fact, very, very much like the liberal loonies in America. They're going after Christians. They're going after Christians. When you get to a checkpoint or something, they're going through people's phones. If they find a Bible app on there, they just shoot them right there. Seen quite a few reports of that. They're taking young girls. I've heard differing reports, you know, up to 15 years old, up to 12 years old. They're taking young girls away from families to become sex slaves to these barbarians. Thank you, President Biden of the American Banana Republic. And again, kind of differing reports on the exact numbers, but women who are married up to 25 years old, their husbands are just being killed to free up those women, again, to be sex slaves for the Taliban. Women themselves, well, we'll talk about that in a minute, won't we? You know, because the liberal loonies in America, they're all about women, women's rights. It's my body. I have every right to murder this baby that's inside of me because of my actions. It's my body. Women should be empowered. They're the ones who wanted this. So we'll talk about the Afghani women in a moment. But this one, if this doesn't tell you what's going on there, folks, I don't know what will. The Taliban, again, like they did in '96, have outlawed music. Music. So while a month ago, Afghans, just like Americans at their choosing, could sing in the shower, they could go out to a public event and sing together. They could become entertainers to stand before a crowd at a restaurant or something and sing for them. That's now illegal. Taliban took a folk singer, a man who just plays a lute and sings traditional folk songs telling about the history of Afghanistan. They went into his house, sat down with him and drank tea, and then they came back the next day, went into his house, shot him dead. Because music is outlawed in Afghanistan. By the way, if you've ever looked at the Bible at all, you might see a chapter called Psalms. Do you know what the Psalms are? They're songs. They're meant to be put to music. The Bible says, "Let the people sing and praise to me." Singing is fundamental to worship of the true God. But when you worship some ridiculous idol in some primitive, barbaric religion, you can outlaw music and musicians. You might have noticed on this channel I kind of like music. I have a little bit to do with it. I would have been shot for that reason over there. Taliban set up checkpoints all over the place. They might not have had the airport proper, but they had all the access to the airport. So all those people who were trying to get out of Afghanistan couldn't get to the airport. Simple as that. And the American general at the end of this had the audacity, the sickening audacity, to say, "We waited for the people to show up at the airport, but we had to leave empty-handed because nobody showed up." There are at least hundreds of them left there, maybe more. At least. They couldn't get to the airport because the Taliban had checkpoints surrounding the airport. And that general knows that perfectly well. He lied. He represents the administration of Biden and Harris, who was elected to office, among others, by Minnesotans. Guess I'm going to have to go for a hot one today and put the wheel up here. I got a fly in here and I've got another weed whacker. We also left citizens of allied countries over in Afghanistan to suffer and die as well. With this tablet, I have to exit everything and then go back in to view a graphic. It's ridiculous, so I'm not going to do it. By memory, the United Kingdom, various EU countries like Czech Republic and Bulgaria, Poland, Italy, Spain. That's about half of them that I saw. Australia. We left all their people there as well. That's going to make us really popular with our allies, isn't it? There are actually private organizations that have sprung up to charter flights to fly basically illegally into Afghan airspace, trying by phone to coordinate with people who need to be picked up. Among the riskiest activities you could ever imagine. Trying to fly in there, especially since we left all these rocket launchers and everything for the Taliban, and they already had plenty to begin with, you know, just take down a plane, for example. There's private organizations who are putting their lives at risk to go in and rescue Americans and these other allied, because our government just abandoned them, just took off. For example, go to projectdynamo.org. From what I can tell, that one is perfectly legitimate. If you would like to donate to assist them, I urge you to do so. Since our government isn't going to save these people's lives, maybe real Americans, not the people sitting in the White House, but real Americans who care about Americans, or just human decency in general. People who have not entered the body of Satan are trying to help save lives over there and putting their lives at risk to do it. If you would like to help fund that, visit projectdynamo.org, and there are others, but there's a lot of sleazebags who come up with fake GoFundMe accounts, as always, fake charities. Make sure you vet them before you give money to them. I'd like to point out that the Taliban does and always has had very good ties with one of its neighbors, Pakistan. Pakistan is a Muslim nation. It is the only nuclear-armed Muslim nation. They have an estimated 100 nuclear weapons. Pakistan is where bin Laden was supposedly hiding out when we supposedly killed him under the Obama administration. I'm not here to debate whether or not that happened. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Either way, it was in Pakistan. The Taliban have been radicalizing Pakistani leaders for quite some time. Radicalizing, now the kind of things I'm describing with the Taliban here, imagine these people having nuclear weapons, 100 of them. And we've already seen a lot of very radical rhetoric come out of Pakistan in recent years, where they've come out and said, we want to right now, we're not using rhetoric, but I'm saying right now, we want to take bombs and bomb India back into the Stone Age. Now. They weren't using rhetoric in the press. They were saying, this is what we want the country to do right now. Now, fortunately, cooler heads prevailed and prevented that from happening. It only takes one of those 100 bombs to somehow get into the hands of these terrorists and for them to float a small boat over into the Hudson River, and New York City will no longer exist, nor will it ever exist again. Or they could float it down the Potomac and the nation's capital is gone. One bomb, that's all it would take. If you don't know the history of Pakistan, remember the British Empire before World War II? The sun never set on the British Empire. They had colonies all around the world. Well, of course, one of them that they had was India, which India at the time was India and what's today Pakistan. Very large landmass. The British Empire had control over that. When they left that, remember Gandhi, who wasn't the saint people think he is, but he was a big part of that movement to free India. A lot of it just had to do with the British couldn't support it anymore. When the British left there, what happened? They immediately started having fights between the Hindus and the Muslims. And what ended up happening was the split of what used to be India into India and what we now call Pakistan. So you had Gandhi in charge of India and you had Nehru in charge of Pakistan. So India and Pakistan have been going at it for the longest time. They're both nuclear powered. But Pakistan has been becoming more and more radical. And they were the ones harboring bin Laden, after the Taliban had been harboring bin Laden up until 9/11. And I gotta ask the burning question, why does a worthless, useless, homeless guy living in a car here in Minnesota know all this, but none of the Minnesotans I talk to seem to have any comprehension of what I'm talking about here? They've never heard of Nehru. They don't really understand who Gandhi was. They can't tell what country he's from. If you give them a map, they can't point out even where the Middle East is, let alone where Afghanistan, Pakistan, India is. Why does this useless, worthless, homeless person, who's so useless that the state of Minnesota can just leave him out here to die and suffer, they don't help? Why do I know this stuff? They're the ones in their brochures and their public rhetoric, propaganda, they claim to be the most educated Americans in the country. So why don't these people around me know any of this? Why do I know this? I don't spend all my days studying the history of Pakistan and India. Do you think that's what I do in my life? But I do learn over the course of my life. Why don't these people do it? Maybe if they did, they wouldn't vote for some idiot like Joe Biden in the first place, and we wouldn't have these problems. But they're too busy allowing people to burn down stores, to loot and to steal, to rob. The carjackings have gone up like 3,000%. They're too busy trying to find ways to justify that and defunding the police to worry about actually learning anything about the world they live in. Why would I need to know anything about India or Pakistan? It's way over there. They're not even powerful countries. What does that matter? Well, maybe because some events in the world will change one day in the future where they suddenly become really, really relevant to you today, as just happened. Maybe that's why you should have learned it in the past. But Minnesotans don't do that. They don't learn. They don't learn. They just don't learn. Which, by the way, is a characteristic of cults. They're indoctrinated. They don't learn. Let's look at the gear that Joe Biden left for the Taliban. This is American weaponry that we just left behind for them. Here you go. American citizens paid for that. When I go to work, my taxes help to pay for that. And we just left it for the Taliban. I have to leave this program to do this. I'm sorry, but this needs to be read to you. So let me find this. Now, we don't know absolutely for certain, so I'm not going to say positively that these numbers are exactly accurate, and obviously they're rounded off anyway. But you get the gist of the problem here, folks. Here's what we left behind for the Taliban. 600,000 weapons. 76,000 vehicles. I'm sleeping in this car that's falling apart, that's just becoming more and more of a death trap every day. And we just left the Taliban 76,000 vehicles. And nobody can upgrade this thing for me? Really? Liberal, loony leftists. 163,000 communication devices. 208 aircraft, including helicopters, all kinds of surveillance and recon equipment, 4,702 armored Humvees, 2,520 bombs, 1,394 grenade launchers, 20,040 hand grenades, 7,035 machine guns. And as you see in this photo, some of those machine guns have already gotten into the hands of the Taliban, who took the opportunity to also wear the American military uniforms that we left behind. I don't know who's watching this video right now. I've told you before, I did not serve in the military. I consider myself someone who fights domestic enemies, which is just as important. We don't get VA benefits, we don't get any praise, nobody salutes us or anything when we devote our lives to fighting against these domestic enemies, like these liberal loonies. But those of you who serve in the military, who I am so proud of and so grateful for, I talk about me wanting to vomit as I go over this stuff. I can't imagine how you feel thinking that the Taliban are wearing your uniform right now, because we just left it behind so they'd have some nice, clean clothes to wear in the Taliban. Continuing on. All of the gear that I just mentioned, consider the fact that the high-tech stuff, especially the aircraft, requires parts and maintenance. Otherwise, they're going to become useless relatively quickly. So what's the Taliban most likely to do? Are they going to keep it around for their Taliban museum? They're not really into culture, you might have noticed. 7th century barbarism. No, what they're going to do is they're going to sell that weaponry to other countries. And tops on the list are Communist China and Russia. Perhaps North Korea. The Taliban hate Iran. But when money's involved, there's a possibility they might sell a few of these even to Iran. That means that Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia could potentially gain our technology to kill our soldiers with and reverse engineer it so that they know how to build them themselves, since we build better stuff than they do. And they will be able to figure out ways to defend themselves against our weapons because they have our weapons. That's exactly what Iran did when they shot down one of our drones several years ago. Now they're one of the biggest, most powerful drone operators in the world because they reversed engineered our drone. But the little guns, the grenade, the launchers and all that, you can bet the Taliban are probably going to keep that. But the big stuff that they can't maintain, that's going to make its way into other people's hands, who are going to do things with it that are far worse than just keeping it around for a show of force. This is going to require us to develop an entirely new generation of weaponry that's fundamentally different to offset the fact that they can now reverse engineer all of this stuff we left over there. Like I said, this is a world-changing event. In case you went to a Minnesota school and you didn't know that. Opium production is about to skyrocket as it did under the Taliban before. What does that mean? That means the influx of heroin and drugs into America, which is already horrific when it comes to opioids, is about to get worse. Child imprisonment. They are imprisoning children. Why would you imprison a 5-6-year-old child? Well, often it's just to terrorize and to their parents and to force their parents to take action they don't want to take, like immoral action, unethical action, illegal action, action that is offensive to a real God, action that is not in their personal best interest. Imprisoning children, these sick monstrosities. A woman was forced to cook for a Taliban group who came and just invaded her home. She was forced to cook for them. They ate, and then they complained about the taste of the food. They didn't like it. So they set her on fire. Joe Biden just claimed success. That woman would be alive today if Joe Biden had never had any kind of power. The kind of power that Minnesotans gave him. All those women, just like I've told you before, in Iran, you look at pictures and video from the 70s, the women of Iran look just like the women of America. They're just walking around, they got the hair, the makeup, wear whatever they want, skirts, mini skirts, jeans. As soon as the Iranian Revolution takes over, burqas. All the women in Afghanistan will not only be expected to wear burqas, but you're about to see what that really involves. I saw on one interview an Afghan pop star, some Britney Spears type thing from Afghanistan, whatever. I'm not into pop music, it's bad music, but of course music's outlawed there. She told the story of how she left. The thing was, she's apparently internationally known. If the Taliban had found her, she would have been raped multiple times by multiple fine and dandy Taliban members and then shot in the head. Or maybe have her neck slit, or, you know, somehow or other she would not be alive with us. She told the story of how she escaped, and the story of what she told there was just gut-wrenching terror. Just adrenaline pumping through your body, sheer terror. And that's when you listen to her story. Can you imagine what she actually experienced? Because she's just one of the women in Afghanistan. And they're all experiencing that now. That's their daily life, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep, and that is their dreams at night, or their nightmares, I should say. Thank you, Joe Biden. Thank you, Minnesota. Yet at the same time, these liberal loonies in America, what are they claiming as a terrorist? What do they claim as terror? This woman experienced terror, going to checkpoints while wearing that burqa, knowing that if they ever figure out who she is, that she's a world-famous pop star, she's not only going to die, but she's going to suffer horrifying pain and suffering and humiliation and exploitation first. She's going to be raped. She's going to be used as a sex toy by 7th century barbarians before she's killed. She knows that the whole time she's trying to get to a plane to get out of there. That's terror. What are these American liberal loonies calling terror? Well, they've been in the news lately saying that unvaccinated Americans are terrorists and that they should be listed as domestic terrorists and treated as such. I have not been vaccinated, folks. Whether you like what I'm saying right now, whether you like the way I say it right now, are you sitting there in absolute, just sheer horrific terror of just imminent rape and being slaughtered? Is that what you're experiencing when you hear me? Or if you were to walk past me because I'm unvaccinated? Because that's what this lady experienced. That was real terror. These leftists are out of their minds. They are completely detached from reality. They don't have the foggiest idea what terror is. Something you don't like is not terror. Terror is when you feel it inside you. You feel the adrenaline going through you, and your heart starts beating, and you fear you're going to have a heart attack, and you're in fear, and you're sweating. That is terror. Like when a bomb goes off, or when a plane crashes into your building. That creates terror. These liberals have so little respect for the people worldwide who experience real terror, or sleeping in a car at night with gangbangers walking around, circling like sharks. That's terror. And these liberal loonies are out there instead saying that if you just don't get a vaccination, you're a terrorist. These people are insane. What an insult to everyone who actually experiences terror in the world. These liberal loonies don't have the foggiest idea what terror is. They've got the most comfortable lives humans have ever lived in all of history in the United States of America, the country they are destroying. Liberalism is a mental illness. It's as simple as that. If you haven't figured that out in the last 3 years, you will never figure that out. Taliban's treatment of women. I have to exit again to look at another document here. Okay, that took a long time to find here. These are the Talibanic laws from back in 1996 to 2001, the first time the Taliban were in charge. This is what they're turning what was developing into a nice free country over the last 20 years. This is what the Taliban is turning it into almost overnight. And the list is too long for me to read everything, so I'm going to fly through some parts of this. This was the rules for women under the Taliban, and it is now going to be the rules for all those women. You know, that these liberal loonies out there claim that they care about their dignity. Lying sacks of garbage. You don't care anything about women, you liberal loonies. A denier of veil is an infidel, and an unveiled woman is lewd. Here are the conditions of wearing the veil. The veil must cover the whole body, in other words, the burqa all the way down. Women's clothes must not be thin. Women's clothes must not be decorated or colorful. They have to be drab. Women's clothes must not be narrow. In other words, they cannot show the shape of the woman's body. They have to drape around the woman. Women cannot wear perfume. If a woman walks through a crowd and smells of perfume, she is to be considered an adulteress and killed, of course. Women's clothes must not resemble men's clothes. Muslim women's clothes must not resemble non-Muslim women's clothes. Their foot ornaments must not produce any sound. They must not wear any sound-producing garments. They must not walk in the middle of the streets. They must not go out of their houses without their husband's permission. They are not allowed to stand on an outdoor balcony of their home where they could be seen from outside. They must remain inside their home, you know, like a prisoner would. They cannot talk to strange men. If it is necessary to talk at all, women must talk in a low voice, and they must never, ever laugh. They must not look at strangers. They must not mix with strangers. All ground and first-floor residential windows should be painted over or screened to prevent women from being visible from the street. The photographing or filming of women is banned. The modification of any place names that included the word women. For example, changing what was called a woman's garden into a spring garden. Does that sound familiar to anybody who's watched the House of Representatives, where idiots like Nancy Pelosi say, we can no longer say the word mother or father? One of the greatest techniques of a tyrant, to take control over people's language, which is why our First Amendment guaranteed us free speech, so that I could call you a midget if I want to, and then you can call me an asshole back if you want to, and we're both free to do so. So that I can put as many mean tweets as I want if I'm President of the United States, because I'm a free leader of a free nation. That's the way it's supposed to be. But under rules of oppressive, medieval, primitive, barbaric, savage regimes, like American liberal loonies or the Taliban, no, you can't use the word women anymore. You've got to use some other terminology. A ban on women's presence on radio, television, or at public gatherings of any kind. Are you seeing a pattern here, folks? If you were an Afghan woman under these rules, what exactly is your life then? What exactly is it? It sounds to me like it is sitting inside your home being raped by your husband and never being allowed to speak while wearing a burqa. It sounds to me like that's your birth. From the day you're born to the day you die, that's your existence. And that's what Joe Biden just handed to every woman in Afghanistan. I'm not even going to go on. I'm not even halfway through the list yet. I'm not even going to go on. What's the point? What's the point? What's the point? And liberal loonies claim to care anything about women. These feminists claim to care anything about women. I don't see feminists surrounding the White House and demanding that the Taliban removed. I don't see that happening. Do you? Or maybe feminism was only a ruse in the first place. Maybe it was only about women who already lived the best lives that human beings have ever lived in the greatest country the world has ever known. It just wasn't enough for them. They wanted more. So they started bitching and moaning for more. Maybe that's what feminism was all along. I don't know. I don't see them outside the White House demanding that the President of the American Banana Republic stop the Taliban from doing this to millions and millions and millions and millions of women. Do you? Do you see that? Maybe I missed it. Where are these people who are all in favor of protecting women's rights? Maybe I missed it. My apologies if I did. I had a note here about when it came to us leaving all those weapons for the Taliban, which they can now sell to all these countries to reverse engineer. It reminded me of back in the 1980s. You remember the Amiga computer? Well, the Amiga computer was originally designed by a group who got together to build a computer that was vastly more powerful than any other existing personal computer at the time. And they did, and it was very, very difficult. They didn't have a lot of financing and funding. They didn't have the Silicon Valley thing. This was the beginning of Silicon Valley. So they spent all their resources designing this, but then they really didn't have enough money to actually build it. But one of the things they had to do, as they mention in histories I've seen, when they set up shop, all the other new computer companies, they spied on each other. So what Amiga had to do was basically put up a storefront that pretended they were like selling joysticks or something silly like that, so that nobody outside knew that they were designing the world's most powerful home computer. So when they went to CES, when they go to the trade show and they announce it to the world, it would just blindside everybody. So they had to hide it from their competitors, because if your competitors get a hold of the fact that you're doing this, they're either going to steal your stuff, they're going to put the screws to you so that you have to give it up to them somehow, like Atari tried to do and Commodore eventually did, or they're going to go about their own R&D and build something that competes with you so that you can't come out of the gate running. That's exactly what's going on with this high tech that we gave to the Taliban and that they're going to sell now to all these other countries. It's as if you develop something like the Amiga, but while you're in development, you mail a prototype to all of your competitors. Just mail it to them as a gift while you're developing it yourself, and you think somehow you're going to come out on top of that. And the toilet papers out here, Star Tribune and all that, Pioneer Press, they're trying to justify this. They're trying to paint a rosy picture as if nothing's wrong. Throughout all of this, folks, the only thing these papers are talking about is stuff like climate change. Oh my gosh, we have a big hurricane, the biggest hurricane in history. Really? Is it? First of all, who was around throughout all of history to figure that out, to document from year zero? You know, billions of years ago, they've told us the world is billions of years old. Where's the documentation? Where's the list? Okay, in the year minus 800,444,222, here was what the hurricane season was like in the area that would one day be called New Orleans. Where is this documentation, since they're telling us factually that this is the biggest hurricane in history to hit Louisiana? You see, they change up the numbers all the time. Every time you get a hurricane like this, they call it the biggest one ever when it serves their purposes, like to try to convince you about climate change. That's what the toilet papers are talking about. Climate change, COVID. You know, oh my gosh, people are starting to understand what Biden just did to the world, how he just destroyed the United States of America right in front of everyone's eyes. Quick, put up another COVID body count. Get it up there fast. Start dividing and conquering, getting people fighting each other. Let's start calling the unvaccinated terrorists, telling them that they're putting everyone at risk. Just like 30 years ago, we told everyone, you're not all Americans, some of whom smoke and others don't, but you are smokers, you are non-smokers. And we're going to create the divide between you so that the non-smokers hate the smokers and fear the smokers. Only now it's the vaccinated hate and fear the unvaccinated. It's the same thing they've been doing all along, folks. No science needed. Just propaganda. That's what the toilet papers are talking about. They're not talking about the devastation that's going to come from what just happened in Afghanistan. And yet, through all this, so far, and apparently going forward, not one single American official of any kind, military, executive office, Biden, anyone, nobody is going to be even held accountable, punished, or fired, let alone prosecuted and imprisoned. Not even one of them. That's your socialist, communist utopia. Sounds a lot like some other countries I could mention. So now that we have completely discredited ourselves, we've abandoned all of our allies can no longer trust us. Remember all those countries we left people there? UK, Poland, Bulgaria, Australia, the list goes on, Spain, Italy. None of these countries can depend on us anymore. We're not reliable. We don't have reliable leadership. When that fake election happened, I put a video up at the very beginning of the year, and I listed out some just reasonable predictions of what was going to come. One of them was Taiwan is a goner. Taiwan is going to be swallowed up by China. And what do you know? China is pretty much gearing up for that very thing. Finally, after all these decades, we can expect to see, I'm not saying right away, it might even be a couple years out, but it's going to be pretty soon before something big happens with China grabbing Taiwan. Who's going to stop them? Biden? Who's going to stop them? Kamala Harris? These people who are asleep while they're awake, they're going to stop China from taking Taiwan. South Korea. Remember the Korean War? The one that my father fought in? Crazy guy, crazy loony guy with the bombs and the nuclear weapons up in the north. The only reason they haven't swept down and taken South Korea is because we've been there the whole time. How? I bet you the people of South Korea are sitting there going, who's protecting us again? It's the people who were in Afghanistan? Those are the only buffer we have against this madman up here coming down and making us a communist, ruthless regime where no one has any freedom and anyone who does anything the government doesn't like just dies? That's what we have to protect us from this? The people of South Korea know what terror is. Unlike these liberal loonies who are out there saying that someone who's smoking a cigarette is a terrorist or somebody who isn't vaccinated is a terrorist. Those people know what terror is because they have a madman a couple miles over there with a bunch of nuclear weapons who is salivating at the chance to come down there and grab the whole Korean peninsula. What about Ukraine? Russia's been trying to take Ukraine again. Learn the history of that area, people. Ukraine is the breadbasket, it's a resource bonanza. Russia has wanted to get its hands on that again for the longest time since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The people of Ukraine right now are probably experiencing real terror, not this baloney terror that these loony liberal leftists and these toilet papers keep projecting to people. The real deal. Terror. Terror. Crimea as well. What about Cyprus? Maybe even Greece. Turkey, with that madman they have in charge, Erdogan. Especially Cyprus. I mean, who's going to stop him? Who's going to stop Erdogan from going into Cyprus? Who's going to stop Russia from going into Ukraine? Who's going to stop China from going into Taiwan? Who's going to stop Madman, Rocket Man, from going into South Korea? Who's going to do it? Is it going to be Joe Biden? I'm just guessing here, but I bet you Donald Trump would have stopped him. But of course, if you don't care about other people and all you care about is yourself, you're going to try to get rid of Donald Trump instead of trying to get rid of an evil Russia, an evil China, an evil North Korea, and an evil Turkey. Aren't ya? Because it's all about you. The only thing that matters in the whole universe is you and what you think. And if you don't like the president and his tweets offend you, you're going to devote your entire existence to getting rid of him, even if you have to lie, cheat, steal, and commit treason against the United States of America to get that. Well, here's the consequences of that, folks. Good job. It was all about you from the very beginning. And hey, what do you know? What do you know? In all my videos here, what have I been talking about with Minnesotans? Narcissistic to the core, self-absorbed. The only thing that matters is them. Other people are nothing more than a tool and a resource for them to consume and exploit. They are the only people in the universe who matter. Gee, I wonder if that has anything to do with the fact that this state voted for Joe Biden to replace Donald Trump, who would have stopped China, Russia, North Korea. Do you get my point yet, or is this just pointless for me to even make such an obvious point? In other news, now Israel has gone through changes as well. It's now has a new government, and it's the most ridiculous government you will ever find. I don't have time to go into how Israeli government works, but they basically elected to have one president for half the term and another person, like a right-winger for the first half of the presidency and a left-winger for the second half of the presidency. Their system is nonsense. Unfortunately, Israel as a political entity was kind of pieced and patched together. So it started out as a socialist country, if you can believe it, until the people actually moved in from socialist countries. All the people who fled the Soviet Union and Nazism and all these socialists. Then the nation became very conservative because the people there understood what it meant to live under socialism and communism. It was only the people who didn't actually have to experience it who wanted it in Israel. Well, so they were like that for a while as it got taken over as more and more people moved in who had a brain, who had world experience. They were like, there's no, socialism's evil. It's deadly. There's no way. So it became more of a conservative country, although it has a lot of liberal stuff going on like it does today with the rainbow flag and all this idiocy. But politically, it was very much conservative, and it's all about protecting Israel because it's surrounded by enemies who want to destroy Israel. Well, now they couldn't take Netanyahu winning over and over and over again. Netanyahu was so strong, he protected Israel very, very well. But no leader can go on forever, especially in a free society. So they made a coalition of people who were from the left, from the right, from everywhere, whose only unifying string is to get rid of Netanyahu, which they did. Well, now they're dealing with the consequences, and that union's going to fall apart. But nonetheless, the one thing that's consistent, even in Israel, unlike America, where America, as the military goes to the left and becomes this woke insanity, this mental illness takes over our military, and to the point where they will sacrifice the United States of America and its people. They will betray the country in the name of wokeness. It's more important to them to somehow justify a quota of women versus men in this particular regiment. That's more important to them than actually having tactics, strategy, and an arsenal to defeat an enemy and protect the American people. That's not like that in Israel. In Israel, even the leftists stand by the rule, we will defend this nation at all costs. We will never again have another Holocaust. And unfortunately, the Bible tells that they will in fact have another Holocaust under Antichrist, but that's another story. But their rule is, we will defend ourselves at all costs. So the intelligence service in Israel is phenomenal, the Mossad. Phenomenal, probably the best in the world. They have said about 2 weeks ago that Iran is about 10 weeks away from having nuclear weapons, which means that right now they're about 8 weeks away. So even if you round that off a bit, and by having a bomb, what I mean is having the fissionable material. So they will have the enriched uranium. Building the actual bomb doesn't take that much effort beyond that if you know how a nuclear bomb works. It's getting that material is the trick. In about 8 weeks from now, 2 months, what is this? Beginning of September, October, by about November 1st or so, Iran will be a nuclear power. And at the same time, another thing that the toilet papers and the mass media, the fake news out there does not bother to tell you is little boats just sailing the 7 seas. Where are they sailing to and from? Gee, they're sailing from Iran and they're sailing into Venezuela. The socialist utopia where the people are breaking into zoos to eat the animals because they don't have any food. The one that people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, whatever her name is, wants to emulate. The socialist communist paradise there. Iran is shipping something over to Venezuela. Gee, I wonder what it could be. Because, you know, in Iran, the loonies who run that place, their worldview is apocalyptic. Their worldview is that it is their obligation to set the world on fire. It's their obligation to destroy everything, including themselves. You see, because the only goal is to bring in their Messiah, their Mahdi. But their Mahdi can't come until he's fixing a world that's just on the brink of complete, utter destruction. So they have to create that condition so that their Mahdi will show up. Well, they're going to do that by getting rid of the great Satan, the United States of America, and Israel. So if they're 8 weeks away from getting a bomb, they don't have anything that even resembles the capability of launching a missile that could come anywhere near the United States of America. Iran doesn't have that. But if they ship it to Venezuela, guess what? They have the missiles to send it from Venezuela to the United States of America. They could hit Washington, D.C., they could hit New York, they could hit Chicago. They probably won't, but they could hit Minneapolis. And again, all it takes is one of those. You blow up Washington, D.C., and with the way this country is today, the United States is over. We become a third world nation overnight, and out of the 350 million or so people in this country, probably about 300 million of them or more will be dead within months from famine, starvation, lack of clean water, being murdered. That's how quick it happens, folks. That's how quick it happens. Iran, 8 weeks from having the bomb. My prediction, and this is just a prediction, I'm not saying it's going to happen. My prediction is you can expect in the next 8 weeks or so, or at least by the end of the year, you can expect to see Israel attack Iran proper. I mean, attack Iran. They're going to do what they have to do. Unlike this country, under this kind of, I can't even call it leadership, under this kind of takeover. I mean, the duly elected president of the United States was overthrown illegally. So I don't know what you call these people who claim to be in charge of things, but they're destroying the country. And we have no protection. We have no protection globally anymore. We just have these lunatics. But Israel's not like that. You can expect to see Israel attack Iran, and hard. Israel is a nuclear armed power. Israel will do what it has to do to ensure its survival. And Iran has sworn over and over and over and over again to destroy Israel and to push all the Jews into the ocean. Not one Jew remaining alive. You can expect to see that. At the same time, I've talked in other videos about how events right now seem to be converging as the Bible indicated they would. And I don't want to go off in that direction too much right here. I'm trying to keep this of things that you can experience in the world, but I'll just point out that in Bible prophecy there are some things that are due to happen soon. And by soon I mean, you know, from 1948 when Israel became a nation again, that kind of started a clock. And while we don't know exactly when they're going to happen, right about now, roughly, is when certain things, according to the Bible, are going to happen. One of them is that the western portion of Iran is going to suffer a cataclysm, and it's going to become uninhabitable, such that the people of Iran, or what they called Persia back then, are going to have to flee. What could possibly cause that? Maybe the fact that the Iranian leadership, not being the brightest stars in the sky, they built all of their nuclear power plants over in a seismic zone, an earthquake zone, right on the edge of the Persian Gulf. A place called, well, the Bible would call Edom. That, hey, what do you know? That's the exact place the Bible thousands of years ago said was going to suffer a cataclysm in the end times and become uninhabitable. So even if Israel doesn't attack Iran, all it would take is a massive earthquake over there, and you've got their nuclear power plants turning into a Chernobyl on steroids, right? And since stuff kind of blows to the east toward Tehran, the people of Iran would have to flee their country to survive, right? So it's a possibility, I don't know. But if that doesn't happen, Israel's going to attack, and they're going to attack nuclear sites to stop the nuclear weapons. Well, you can kind of get the same thing out of that, can't you? Another thing the Bible says is going to happen is that Damascus, Syria, the capital of Syria, what some say is the longest running city in human history, the longest inhabited city. The Bible says that Damascus, in one night, after thousands of years of being around, in one night, Damascus will cease to be a city. It will become a ruinous heap, never to be inhabited ever again. Gee, folks, what could have caused that back in the time of Abraham? Maybe an asteroid collision, I guess that could, if it was small enough. But anything that's big enough to take out a city like that would probably destroy the whole world, you know, nuclear winter, all that stuff. But even then, over thousands of years, the dust would settle and you could rebuild, right? So why would it never be inhabited again, unless maybe it had a lot of radiation there? The only one who's really in a position and with a motive to nuke Damascus is Israel, because Damascus is where all this terrorism is threatening Israel. So you can see different kinds of scenarios. Israel, to defend itself, attacks Iran, destroys its nuclear program, or at least sets it way back so that they don't have the bomb in 8 weeks. Well, by doing that, Iran's proxies in Hezbollah takes its 175,000 rockets and starts shooting them at Israel. But let's say they do it from Damascus, because if they're hiding in a city, this is what the Palestinians do all the time. When they send all those rockets before, they go and they hide behind a school and a hospital and an apartment building, or the Al Jazeera, or, you know, the building for the media, and they fire their rockets, because what's Israel going to do? Bomb the school, the hospital, to stop them? Well, what if they go into Damascus and they shoot 175,000 rockets at Israel? Israel's going to send one nuclear weapon over to Damascus, and let's see, Damascus will in one night cease to be a city, will become a ruinous heap, never to be inhabited again. Hey, that's what the Bible said. You can kind of see how these kinds of events could possibly play out. I'm not saying it's going to happen that way. I don't know. But I find it interesting that a book written 2,000 to 3,000 years ago predicted this stuff, and that the time frame, when you study the Bible, says that that thing was going to happen right about now, about 2,000 years after the death of Jesus, which is coming up about 9 years from now. If you're interested in that kind of thing, you might want to search on Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel was a prophet, and he predicted that a whole huge coalition of countries from all that surround Israel, but not the ones right next to him, not Jordan, not Saudi Arabia. Oddly enough, not all these ones that now have agreements with Israel under Trump, but the other ones. Folks, this is thousands of years ago, and these countries didn't even exist then, and the Bible predicted that an outer ring of countries that are not adjacent to Israel were going to descend on Israel to take it out, led by, of all things, Russia. And Russia, for the first time ever, is in the Middle East. In fact, they're in Damascus. They're in Syria, just a few miles away from Israel. There's going to be a war like that, and there's no way Israel can win against that, against Russia and Turkey and Iran and Egypt and all these other countries at the same time. Israel can't win against that, and yet the Bible says they're going to win because the hand of God. God is going to just supernaturally destroy all of them. And that's going to shift the world powers, isn't it? The thing is, God doesn't work that way in this world right now, does he? Not in this dispensation. So in order for that to happen, we must move to the next dispensation. Prior to that is what? The rapture of the church. Once the church is gone, the world goes back to the way it was in biblical times, where the hand of God comes down more than obviously, just like that. Everything fits together. So as angry as I am at these Minnesotans for what they have done, for the pain and the suffering that they're causing now for these people in Afghanistan and throughout the whole world for that matter, for the risk that they have put everyone at, the whole species is now at risk. In part, not because of, but in part because of these Minnesotans voting for idiots to run the country. As much as that bothers me in the here and now, that only concerns the fact that women are being treated that badly. Children are being imprisoned. They are being raped. They are being sold into sexual slavery. These horrors are descending on all these people. That makes me furious. Our military personnel have been humiliated, especially the ones who fought in Afghanistan over those 20 years. Everything they did was for nothing. That infuriates me. But having said that, everything we're seeing is going generally in the general direction of at least how I and many others interpret the Bible as having prophesied that world events would happen in the end times. And for that reason alone, I can have a little bit of peace over all of this, because it's happening just as the Bible said it would. And that means I already know what's coming, folks. If you don't know what's coming, I think that's the place you need to look. You know, the book of Revelation in the Bible, 66 books in the Bible, the last one, the book of Revelation that everyone thinks is so hard to understand, it really isn't, but you know, it's apocalyptic literature, a lot of imagery in there. It's the only book that promises people who read it, who hear it, and who act on it. In other words, telling others, like I'm doing right now, it promises them a blessing. There's no other book in the Bible that promises you a blessing just for reading it, or even hearing someone else tell you about it. You've just been blessed because I've told you about it. There's something about it. Folks, I don't know what else to tell you. If you want to make sense out of the world as it is today, the craziness, the insanity, the way that it just seems to have turned evil and stupid, which are kind of synonymous anyway, but when it's turned that way almost overnight from our perspective in just a few short years, and in one day you can have something like this Taliban takeover. If you want to make some kind of rational sense out of it, the only thing I can recommend to you is look to the Bible. The Bible prophesied that this was going to happen. It's not a prediction where it lists out and says, oh, in 1948 Israel will become a nation again, you know, in such and such day the rapture will happen. And it doesn't work that way. That's not what it was meant to do. Prophecy is meant to validate the veracity of the Bible, and that works just as well if you can only see the prophecy after it happens, which is what generally happens. But when you're looking at prophecies, you know that something like an Ezekiel 38 war is coming, and you know generally when it's coming. You know that Damascus is going to be hit with a nuclear weapon, at least one. There's nothing else that fits the description of this that they described 2,000, 3,000 years ago. You know that eastern Iran is going to suffer a cataclysm. It might come from an earthquake, it might come from an Israeli attack, don't know. But we know it's going to happen, and it's probably going to happen relatively soon. The Bible predicted in end times that there would be an increase in all these things. Natural disasters. Well, when they're sitting there saying, this is the worst hurricane in the history of Louisiana, what do? They go out and they blame climate change. When the Bible clearly says, God has told us, I'm in control of this world. Don't worry about it. This world is not going to be your demise. I've got it. I designed it, I created it, I sustain it. Don't worry about it. It might get a little hot, you might suffer from some drought and all these things. These are the consequences of sin in a fallen world. But there's no such thing as human beings having the capability to just alter the climate, especially in 100, 150 years. It doesn't work that way. But these loony liberals, that's all they have to lean on. They have no other explanation for these things, so they see a hurricane, there you go, proof of climate change. Whereas I look at it and I say, well, there you go, the Bible predicted that right around the time when Russia would for the first time be down there near Israel and all these other things are happening, you're going to see an increase in earthquakes and droughts and floods and famines and all these things. And hey, what do you know, that's exactly what we're seeing. And the Bible also prophesied, using different words, that we were going to see a massive increase in evil and stupidity. Seems like a good explanation for what's going on today, doesn't it? I highly recommend you start looking there for answers. Seriously. This isn't about trying to convert you to Christianity or something. I sure hope you do, because that is eternal salvation. But it's also going to give you the peace of mind of knowing you will be one of the people who knows and understands why the world is flushing, circling down the drain as it is right now. Instead of just sitting there looking at it and constantly saying, I can't believe what I'm seeing. I can't believe this happened. How could this happen? I'm getting scared. I don't understand. I don't feel like we're in control of anything. If that's how you're feeling right now, start studying Bible prophecy. And it's difficult because there's some charlatans out there. I pointed some out on this channel. It's difficult, I know. But pray to God for sincere wisdom and be sincere about it. Go to Jesus Christ and ask Him to show you what is going on in this world. What are you trying to show me, Jesus? Because as the world comes to an end here, according to your plan, I'm feeling that I need to know what's going on. And if you feel that, that's an indication that you're supposed to go to Jesus to get the answers. And I highly recommend that you do. Because, folks, as angry as I get about what's going on here, the injustice of it, the suffering of these human beings around the world, when it comes to the final analysis of all this, I'm not even worried. I already know what's going to happen. I already know the end of this story. It doesn't matter. If Iran sends a nuclear weapon to Venezuela and that gets lobbed over into Washington or New York, it doesn't matter in the big picture. It's part of what's been described. All this stuff is. So I don't even worry about that. COVID, this whole coronavirus health scare, I've known from the beginning what it's about. I've known about it because I studied junk science, so I knew it was a fraud. But you had to understand, well, why is the fraud there? Why is this fear-mongering going on with it? Well, and there are people dying from it. How does all this stuff tie together? The reality of a disease that is in fact killing people with the ridiculous amount of propaganda and the amount of control they're trying to take over people's lives and the divide and conquer. You're vaccinated, you're not. You two need to hate each other and fear each other. Why is this happening? If you want to understand why all these things are happening, look to the Bible. It explains all of it. Maybe not in absolute detail, it doesn't list out the details, but it doesn't have to. It was never intended to. But everything that's happening today is fitting exactly what you would expect to happen based on Bible prophecy, which is mainly in, well, it's throughout the whole Bible, to be honest, but Ezekiel, Isaiah, the book of Daniel, throughout the Gospels, the book of Revelation, and many other places. So I'll just leave it at that, folks. This one's gone on long enough. In just a few short weeks, every bad thing that we feared would happen from the Taliban is in fact happening, and it's just getting worse. Pray for the people of Afghanistan. Please. If you think this couldn't happen here, you don't understand world history. There has never been one country that was immune to a sudden demise and rapid takeover by that kind of evil. There hasn't been one country. And when you look at how weak this country is now with the so-called leadership we have of who don't even respect the foundations of the country, such that I can't call it the United States of America anymore. I can only call it the Banana Republic of America. When that's what we have in charge of the show, yeah, this country that we live in the United States, that quickly could become something similar to that, especially since we've let in millions of people who adhere to that religion, and they're just lurking about in the shadows all over the place, waiting. And we have no defense. We don't have any leadership. But we do have the one who's in charge up there. And that's where I get my peace from. And I encourage you to look at the Bible, and specifically Bible prophecy. Don't get distracted by these rabbit holes that these false teachers and just deluded people send you on, looking for giants, looking for UFOs. That isn't the point. Focus on real, true prophecy, documented and clear in the Bible. And you'll start to understand why all these things are happening. And you're going to feel a peace that surpasses all understanding in your heart, even as the world bursts into flames around you. That's not a promise I make to you. That's a promise that your Creator made to you in the Bible. It was there all along. All you had to do was look for it. And with that, I hope it helps. I hope it helps some of you find some peace out there at a time when we all really need it. Thank you so much for watching this video, alright? Hope you'll be back for the next one.